holding chapter 21. What is the Nakuda? We alluded to this last week. That what does chapter 21 add to the chapter 20? And we mentioned that even though it seems like the Alter Rebbe is just culminating the message of the 20th chapter, but be'emes, there's something fundamentally different in the message which the Alter Rebbe demonstrates in the 21st chapter over the 20th chapter. So let's try to understand this. What does the Alter Rebbe tell us in the 21st chapter? So let's go back to a little bit just to recap a little what we learned in the 20th chapter. So in the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is trying to point out the bittul of oilamus in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means the state of true nullification of the worlds, and he refers to all worlds in the face of the infinite light of Hashem. When you say all worlds, there are infinite levels, amounts of oilamus, but generally, as it's divided and compartmentalized, is Elam Hazeh and Elam Haba. So it says the whole Elam Hazeh was created, the entire Elam Hazeh was created with a Yud, with a Hey of Hashem. The Yud, with the Elam Haba, was created with a Yud. It says, Ki B'Koh Hashem Tzuri Lami. B'Koh Hashem Tzuri Lami. Tzuri Lami means he created the worlds. How did he create the worlds? B'Koh. B'Yud Kei. Yud Nivra Elam Haba, and Hey Nivra Elam Hazeh. So again, we mentioned last week, it says Hashem created the world with many other words. Asar Mamaris Nivra Elam, with 10 sayings, full sayings. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. You see more than one letter. So it says in the reconciliation between the two is that these are already subdivisions of the main energy, which is the Hey, and then you have, from that Hey, you have the Asar Mamaris, the 10 sayings. But the whole world was ultimately created. The core energy of this world is a Hey. The core energy of the Elam Haba is a Yud. That itself, just even before elaborating, that itself tells us how the non-existent, how the nothingness, and the non-existentness, let's say, of this world in comparison to the face of the Or and Sof. Without even expanding on this notion, just like when we understand what is one letter in comparison to the entire ability, the entire amount of words and letters that I spoke today, it's completely insignificant. I just pointed out last week, we say insignificant doesn't mean that it has no value. The world has value, and there's a reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. But you're talking about the world on its own without the message of creation. The world has no value. It's insignificant because just like in my system, I understand what is one letter in comparison to all the letters I spoke today. How many letters does an average person speak in an average day? Thousands of letters. A certain amount of words. Every word is a combination of letters. So thousands of letters. Like we gave an example: one leaf of a tree. What's the significance of a leaf in comparison to 10,000 leaves? Almost nothing. When you say 10,000, when you say 100,000 leaves, it loses more and more its entity. And if you say one leaf in comparison to all the leaves in the world, how many leaves are in the world? I don't know. There's no number which probably you can say. We don't know. I mean, people probably do know, but you're talking about the trillions and trillions of leaves. So what's one leaf in comparison to almost nothing? So when you say the world was created, so similarly, when you say how many words or letters the average person speaks in a day, thousands. What is one word in comparison to all those words? One letter in comparison to all those letters he utters, all those letters he speaks. You can say it's completely, in the face of all those letters that he speaks, it's completely nothing. And then what the Alter Rebbe did in the previous chapter was that he goes deeper within the nefesh, in the place where letters exist, but at a much more refined level, or more of a subtle level, which is, for example, Oisis HaMachshava. In thought, there's also letters. People think in languages, but the letters in thought are much more refined. They're much more soul type of expressions. That's what we mentioned We gave the simple analogy, which explains this difference of machshava and dibur. A person, it could take him 5 minutes to think about a concept in order to express it in speech. It could take him hours. But if there's letters in the thought and letters in speech, why here you can do it in 5 minutes or in 5 seconds or 50 seconds, and it takes the same 50 seconds of thought, but it could take hours to express. In other words, when you want to express it in speech, it could take you hours. The answer, because in thought, there are also letters, but the letters in thought are much more refined, a much more soul expression. It's beyond the concreteness of words, the way it comes out in speech. It's more subtle, it's more refined, and therefore it doesn't take the same time to express thought like it takes the time to express the speech. So what Rebbe was basically saying is take one letter of speech in comparison not only to the world of speech of man, but in comparison to the world of thought of man. Again, we elaborated on this. Anybody could see on the website. Also with the text, without the text. You have a kosher tube with it, without the text. You have Tanya online with it, tanyaonline.com with the text. In any case, that you have the letter, one letter. Again, we elaborate on this, not to waste much time on this, but one letter in comparison to the world of thought loses more its significance, not only on a quantitative level but on a qualitative level, because the letters, the way they're in thoughts, are a different type of letters. This is more soul type of letters, and then the Alter Rebbe goes deeper and he says, what is one letter in the comparison to the world or this part of the soul which exists within man, which letters don't even exist, because letters are created in thought. Prior to thought, when a person has a feeling to something, there's no letters. Otiyot hamidot. Otiyot is something which commences and initiates. It's produced when a person starts thinking about something. Again, not only intellectualizing, but namely, he thinks about something and a way to achieve it. He pursues it in thought. That's when letters are created. That's when we say person thinks in a certain language. Prior to that, there are no letters. So what Alter Rebbe is saying basically is, take that letter and put it in the face in the place where there are no letters at all. It loses more and more its significance, because as long as it's in a place where there are letters, you can say it's almost not, but you can say it's not completely, because there's still ICS, maybe ICS hadibur, nesim machshava. Even there is so many more letters in the world of speech, and so many in dealing with the quality of letters in the world of thought, but letters they are, so you cannot say that it's completely not as nothing. And where could you say that this is nothing when you put it in a place, in the face of a place where there is no ICS at all, there's no letters at all, which is deeper within the soul, which when you're dealing with midas, which is the attributes, the feelings and attributes of man. And the Rebbe says you can go even deeper within the neshama, which is the intellect of the human being, of the nefesh, the intellectual dimension of the nefesh. The intellectual faculties are much more of a profound and deeper part of the nefesh, which certainly otiyot, which is letters, structured letters, don't exist. So take that us and put it in the world where otiyot don't exist. Again, more and more, there's this ot completely lose its entity as a mitzius, as a something. It becomes a state of nothing. In other words, if you look at it in comparison to all that, it really is. We gave the example of 1 teaspoon from the Mediterranean. What is 1 teaspoon of the Mediterranean in comparison to all the waters in the Mediterranean? You could also almost say almost nothing. Truth is, nothing. You cannot say nothing, because what is the waters in the Mediterranean? At the end of the day, it's all teaspoons of water which comprise the entire Mediterranean. So you cannot say nothing. If you place that teaspoon in a place where it's not even an existent entity of water, then you can say that it's mamish nothing. That's just says otiyot, in comparison to the world of speech. It loses nothing is because it's quantitatively greater. But it's still something. Because all these words and speech and thousands or tens of thousands, a million letters a person spoken since he was born. It's a lot. And what is one ot is nothing. But you can't say it's truly nothing, because you're dealing with a quantity of isis. But then you go deeper within the soul in comparison to the world of machshava and say it's a different type of isis, a qualitative difference of isis. It's not the same thing. So true. At that point, this ot of dibor, of speech, loses more, essentially, its value or its entity as a something because you're placing it in front of something totally different. But in the end of the day, otiyot do exist in machshava, in thought, and therefore you can't say it's completely nothing. When you go deeper within the soul, where otiyot don't exist even, which is again in the feelings and the faculties of feelings, the faculties of intellect, otiyot don't even exist. So at that point, the ois, the one speech, the one word, is really nothing if you place it in front of this, the nefesh itself, the core of the nefesh. So carry this whole mashal to Hashem. And Hashem is so much greater, because everything is, if we can understand this by the mortal human being, how much more so when we're dealing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the whole entire world, both worlds, Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba, with 2 letters. So take Olam Hazeh, the whole entire world was created with a hey. Take one hey in comparison to all the ability of God's speech. It's nothing. But you're going to say it's still God's speech, like we say the Mediterranean still is about water. So go deeper within God, with His thoughts. So obviously our thoughts, like it says, our thoughts are not in the same category as Hashem's thought, but still, the reason why we have this structure of intellect, feelings, thought, speech, and action is because ultimately it evolves the way it's in heaven above, ultimately by God. So God also, to some degree, we're not defining God's thought, but the concept, the phenomenon of machshava by Kodesh Baruch Hu does exist. So take that one letter and put it in the face of God's machshavas, it's really nothing. And go deeper within God, where otiyot doesn't exist, which are the 10 sfirot, as we mentioned, 10 sfirot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is divided into the intellectual dimension, Chachma Bina Das of every world, and the midot of every world, the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod. And again, we have it within ourselves. The reason why we have it, because it evolves from the way it is in above, by God, ultimately. So, when you put that ot with Hashem expressed, in other words, He placed that little teaspoon, let's call it, in that one letter which you create the world in the face of the entire infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it completely loses itself. It's no mitzvah. So what he's saying ultimately is that the world on its own, it looks, gigantic, magnificent, and so complex and so on, but hello, this was just created by one letter of Hashem, and in the face of the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's really nothing. There's no thing at all. And that's what the Alter Rebbe really, that's the message which the Alter Rebbe conveys in the 20th chapter. That in the face, sorry?
20th or 21st?
In 20th. In 20th, still says the 20th. In the 20th chapter, so when we think about, so where's the God Himself? You know where God is? I mean, Alter Rebbe is not saying this right now, or there's not. It's in the whole core, if you want to say, the teaspoon of the Mediterranean. And where's the Mediterranean? Mediterranean is God Himself in the parable, or in the nimshal of this. It says the Torah mitzvahs. When a person opens Gemara, he has the entire God Himself. Not only he leaves that world of that little us, that little nothingness, non-existent entity, which is again when you disassociate world of the mission and the goal and the purpose of the world, which is ultimately to learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, and you separate it from that. Ultimately, it's just that little nothing type of us letter, which has no meaning and insignificant. But when you open a Gemara and learn Torah, ultimately, you're not only creeping to a deeper level in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's the whole package of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in that piece of Gemara, and the whole package of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in that mitzvah. So if I can take the little teaspoon, and if I want a lot of water, let's say, and I just make a big fuss of it, a teaspoon, and I don't pay attention to the whole Mediterranean, it's very silly, because if I want water, I want the whole Mediterranean instead of the little us. And the same thing when we divest ourselves, or when we don't pay attention to the purpose of creation, what we're dealing with, and we're going back and forth, is in one little nothing, non-entity, in comparison to the big Eibishter, which is ultimately in the objective and the purpose, which is in the piece of Gemara, in Halacha. In the mitzvah we do, we have the entire Eibishter. The Eibishter says, "Oisiatem leichim." That you're taking me when you do the mitzvah, the entire me, more than my speech, more than my thought, more than my feelings, more than my intellect, says Hashem. You're taking the whole essence when you do a mitzvah, when you put on tefillin, when you put up a mezuzah, when you open a sefer halacha. As opposed to when you divide, you don't connect the objective and goal of creation, and you just invest in creation, is like somebody who's just investing in something which is completely nothing. So that's ultimately the message. But right now, here the Alter Rebbe is just demonstrating again another dimension of the unity when we say Hashem Echad, that everything is Hashem. Because There isn't anything else other than Hashem. Because if you take this whole world which was created with one us, with one little letter, and in the face of Echad, Hashem himself, is like giving significance to one teaspoon in the face of the entire Mediterranean. There is only the Mediterranean. It's so minute, that teaspoon, that you can say it's almost nothing. So what is the Mediterranean is? And the same thing, Hashem Echad, what is? It's only God. But no, there's a world together with God. Before Hashem created the world, it was God. After, there's a world, so there's two entities. No, this little entity is almost nothing. Or for all practical purposes is nothing. So this remains the same Hashem Echad, it's the same God. Before He created the world, it was God. After He created the world, it's also God. But what about the world? The world is, it's nothing. It's like, for example, someone's going to walk in, you walk into a room, and there's this beautiful piece of furniture, and that's the only thing in the room. And someone's going to say, that's the only thing in the room? If you look very clear with a microscope, you'll find a little piece of dust on the floor. And therefore there's two things in the room. It's a pretty silly statement, because when I say this is the room, this is what's in the room. You're going to find something, but it's insignificant. And the world, in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is like we say, it's so insignificant, again, with this parable of one letter in the face of all of God. So God was there before He created the world. After He created the world, it's only God also, because whatever He created is ultimately so minute. Again, that's the message of the 20th chapter. The 21st chapter, Dr. Rebbe is pointing out and says, as minute as it is, as little as it is, but how can you say ultimately that it's truly not? And even in the example we just gave, if someone comes to the room and says this beautiful, majestic piece of furniture, and it's the only thing in the room, and someone's going to say, you see, there's a little crumb. You're going to say, come on, a little tiny bit, that's not. There's only this beautiful piece of furniture. You're going to find a crumb. I mean, it's really not in comparison to what really is. But then someone's going to come and argue and say, it's still a crumb. You can't say that the only thing in the room is that piece of furniture. Because as small as it is, it still is. And the same thing when in the 21st chapter, again, is just coming to explain us, as someone might argue, you demonstrate time and again the insignificance of Olam, which is created with one letter in comparison to the Ein Sof, to the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. True, but this is in comparison to. But could you say that it's really not? I see a table, I see a chair, I see people, I see the heaven, I see the sun, I see the star. It's something. You're going to say it's not in comparison to the Ein Sof, but how could you say that it's completely nothing? We gave the example. Someone's going to say a penny in the face of $1 million. Almost no significance. But there, it's really before, in the first part of the mashal, because $1 million really comprised of pennies. You pull out a penny of $1 million, no more $1 million. And that you can go on and say, because in the end, when you're dealing with money, or this type of example, you're only dealing with quantity. There's no qualitative difference in the penny and the $1 trillion. It's only a quantitative difference. So that really belongs to the first part of the example of one letter in comparison to the world of speech or to the world of machshava. Machshava is already a qualitative difference, but it's still isis. When you go deeper within the soul of man, when otiyot don't exist, then you're dealing with something totally different. But let's still use that pattern of money, even though the difference is only a quantitative difference. Take a penny in the face of $1 million. It's nothing. I mean, they canceled the penny. We mentioned last week. They canceled the penny. It's like finished already. Take the same penny in the face of $1 billion, you lose more and more significance. And take the penny in the face of $1 trillion. Mamish nothing. But take $1 trillion, and this mathematically, in other words, you could say it's really nothing and has no significance, but take $1 trillion and you pull out one penny. Could you say it's $1 trillion anymore? It's no $1 trillion. It's not. Because one's going to say, yeah, it still is, because like no one counts pennies. But exactly, to be exact, it's not. It's not. You took out a penny, it's no more $1 trillion. If you want to say there's a truth, it's a fact. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is really questioning or clarifying in the 21st chapter. The whole 20th chapter is saying how the world which was created with one us of Hashem, one letter in the face of the infinite light of Hashem, is really nothing, but it's all in the face of the infinite light of Hashem. But after Hashem created it and uttered that word, hey, and a world was created so true in the face of Hashem, it's really nothing. But once Hashem said, He spoke creation into being, so it's still something. Comes out Rebbe in the 21st chapter and says, even after He spoke it, it remains nothing. And that's a very essential difference of the nimshal, in other words, the mashal, this parable, which we gave, to the nimshal, the way it is by God. Because when man utters a word, says a word, take that word in comparison to the whole system within man. Again, we say in comparison to all his speech and all his thought and all his feelings, where otiyot don't exist, letters don't exist, or intellect where letters don't exist. It's true that it has no significance. But once he says the words, he utters the words, he says hello, that hello becomes a separate entity. You can never, women say the famous expression, one can never regret on something he didn't say, because it's all within the system. You could regret, and people do regret, on something they said. Take it and put, before they said it, where was those words? Why are they so embarrassed about it only when they said it? Where was that word before they said it? Why were they embarrassed when the word was still within its original potential state? It was there. Or like you thought about the word to say, why aren't you embarrassed when it was on your thought? Why are you embarrassed only when you uttered the word, when you verbally pronounced the word and said it? The answer is because as long as within the system, it wasn't a structured word. I had nothing to be embarrassed of. You didn't hear it. You didn't know about it. The moment I said it, it became a concrete, structured word. It became a something. I got to deal with it. People have to deal with the statements they say. And many problems, like Mishlei, Shlomo Melech says, you guard your tongue, you guard from problems in your soul, means to say, you guard yourself from problems within society. Because once you utter a word, right, the biggest politician, he said that. It's marked for history. He said that, and he said something like, because it already became something. You can't put it back into the system. People would like to put it back into the system. Just to wherever it came from. It was in my thought. Take it. Put it back in my thought. Or let my thought come or let my whole self come and huddle over that word and let it become nullified again within my system, to go back into my system. Can't do that. Because once you said it, it's out of your system. People held on to it. They printed. It's in all the newspapers. You cannot take it back. But that's how it works by man. As opposed to when you're dealing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But let's just, to get it the way it is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let's just say one more little kvetch over here when it comes to man, and this is the punchline. This word, what I said, a minute ago, it was within the system. Therefore, no one knew about it. I didn't have a problem with it. Let's take a problematic word, let's say. It was within the system. It was within, even in the first level, it was within my thought. No one knew about it. It wasn't a problem. And even before it was in my thought, when it was in the world of feelings, the world of intellect, it was really in a state of not at all, not. When it came in my thought, it started forming a letter, which ultimately could be a problem. But it was there, it had some formation, it had some beginning, end, but it wasn't something so concrete that you could have held on to it, print it, or deal with it, or talk about it. So, as it came from a place where it really, letters don't exist, but eventually it goes through the system, eventually it creates, the initiation of letters are in thought, but again, it wasn't a problem then, but when I put it into a word, then it became a problem. So why can't I take that word? Now, where is my thought in my whole system? I'm right over here. I'm right over here. So if I was able to take that word and put it back within my system, it would have been beautiful. It's like I suck it out of the space where it was, where you were able to hold on to it and make a fuss out of it, and now I take it and I put it back within myself. No one knows about it anymore. Theoretically, it doesn't exist. And the answer why it doesn't exist, but man, because I'm only here. I'm only in this place, in this domain. The moment I said that word, it left my system. So because it left my system, now I'm here, the word has left. You grab onto it, and it could be for forever. If it's not a good saying, it runs down in history, and the media, everybody would pick it up and Because I cannot say, okay, just let me put it back in. No, I stop over here. This is where I am. Now from here begins a table and other realities. So that word has left, and you could pick up on it. When it comes to God, when God said creation into being, it's not that God stops over here, creation into being, and therefore creation has its own significance and reality. God's everywhere. There's no domain where you can say the whole core and essence of God is not there. To say, okay, here's where God stops, now his speech came into being, so the speech is a separate entity, which is again his speech which has created a world. So there's God and then there's a world. Before Hashem created the world, it was only God, now there's God in a world. He's in charge, as we mentioned a few times, but there's a world. But that whole principle, because in the end of the day, as insignificant as it is, based on the 20th chapter, in the end of the day it's something. Like that penny. It's nothing in comparison to $1 trillion, but it's something. And the same thing over here. When you say Hashem spoke creation into being, He spoke. He took the word out of His system. And now, like we said by man, once it leaves your system, it can become a problem also. And the world becomes a separate entity. Because Hashem ultimately pulled it out of the system. True, when it was in Hashem's system, it was in a state of not, like the words, when it's within our system, it's a state of not. He pulled it out of His system, like when I speak, it becomes a state of yes, you can take it and deal with it, depending what the type of saying is. And the same thing, Hashem spoke creation into being, so now the world is, apparently. And you can't take that back. Or you can't say it's truly not, because ultimately it left his system, and with this he created something. It is a mitzias. Hashem Vayemer, the Lashon is Kihu Amar Vayeh. He said, and it happened, and became, and there's a sun, and there's a moon, there's stars, and so on. He said, but the only differences between God and the human being is me, again, because I stop over here, what comes out of my mouth, again, get carried on to a place where I am not, therefore, you could pick up on that word and say, well, that word is not going back into my system because I'm only here. And I'm not from here and onwards, so you can grab my word and do whatever you want with it. By Hashem, there is no place where you say Hashem stops. Till here is Hashem. Hashem uttered a word, and now there's an olam. In the place where the olam is, that's where Hashem is as well. In the place where there's a world, that's where God is. There's no place which is devoid of God. So take, for example, to understand it a little bit, let's say I kind of think of a word, or I hum a word within my system. So I said it, I uttered it, but it's ultimately still within me. Think about the way to understand is, let's say I hum a word within my system. You can't hear it. But I hum it. I hum it in a way that it's somewhat it's a word. But no one could hear it. And the reason why it's not a problem, because it's within me. The same thing when Hashem spoke creation into being. Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is everywhere. Not only there's no place that's devoid of Hashem. So in the place where Hashem spoke, He's there as well. So therefore, what the Alter Rebbe is going to say, we'll read it, God willing, in the text, and next week, Be'ezus Hashem, is that in the place where there's an Olam, there's the whole Ein Sof, the whole infinity of God. So it's not only the world in comparison to God, God's greatness is insignificant, but ultimately a separate entity it is. No. It's even when it is, it's also not, because Hashem is everywhere. Everything is there. Everything. Hashem is in every single domain. So you cannot say that Hashem stops. The infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu stops, and then speech comes into being. Hashem is everywhere, even where His speech is. So if speech created an Olam, the whole Ein Sof is there. So the speech always remains within the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hence, before, this explains us where we say, by davening, before you created a world that was only God, and even now, when you created the world, there's only one reality. It's only God.